Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar was a man of boundless ambition, charisma, and political genius. He skillfully navigated politics, using alliances to climb the ladder of power. Caesar understood that true influence came from the loyalty of the people and the might of an army. He formed the first triumvirate with Crassus and Pompey, dominating Roman politics. Caesar secured Gaul, waging the Gallic Wars for nearly a decade. He amassed a fortune and forged a loyal army. Caesar meticulously documented his campaigns, ensuring his fame grew. The triumvirate began to crumble after Crassus's death, devolving into a rivalry between Caesar and Pompey. The Senate, fearful of Caesar's power, allied with Pompey. The confrontation finally came to a head in 49 BCE. The Senate issued an ultimatum to Caesar: disband his army and face prosecution. Caesar marched his 13th legion to the Rubicon, the legal boundary of Italy. Crossing with an army was an act of insurrection. He uttered the famous phrase, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast, and plunged the Roman world into civil war. The Senate and Pompey were caught unprepared. They abandoned Rome and fled to Greece. Caesar won a stunning victory at the Battle of Pharsalus. Pompey was assassinated in Egypt. Caesar was now the undisputed master of the Roman world. Returning to Rome, Julius Caesar consolidated power like never before. The Senate showered him with honors, making him dictator for life. This broke tradition, placing him in a position similar to a king. He initiated reforms extending citizenship and launching building projects. But his power unsettled the aristocracy, who saw it as an assault on the Republic. A conspiracy led by Brutus and Cassius formed to assassinate Caesar on the Ides of March. The conspirators stabbed him to death. The people were horrified, turning against the assassins. Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into civil war, paving the way for the rise of the first emperor. The death of Julius Caesar did not restore the Republic. It unleashed chaos. The power vacuum he left behind was fiercely contested in a new round of bloody civil wars. On one side stood the liberators, Brutus and Cassius, desperately trying to rally support for the old Republican order. On the other stood Caesar's allies, led by his loyal general Mark Antony, and his shrewd grandnephew Octavian. Together, Antony and Octavian hunted down and defeated Caesar's assassins, but their alliance was one of convenience, not friendship. Once their common enemy was eliminated, they inevitably turned on each other, dividing the Roman world between them in a tense standoff that could only end with one man standing. The final confrontation came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Octavian's fleet, commanded by Marcus Agrippa, faced the combined forces of Mark Antony and the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. The battle was a decisive victory for Octavian. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, where they would both take their own lives, leaving Octavian as the last remaining power player. After decades of relentless civil war, the state was exhausted and the people longed for peace. Octavian returned to Rome not as a conqueror but as a savior, the man who had finally ended the strife. He held the fate of Rome in his hands. Wary of his great-uncle's fate, Octavian knew he could not declare himself dictator or king. The word rex was still poison in Rome. Instead, he performed a masterful political maneuver. In 27 BCE, he appeared before the Senate and announced he was renouncing all his emergency powers. It was brilliant political theater. In gratitude, the Senate persuaded him to accept titles and powers that effectively made him the sole ruler. They granted him the new name Augustus, meaning revered or illustrious. Augustus crafted a new political settlement that we now call the Principate. He never called himself emperor. Instead, he preferred the title princeps, or first citizen. He maintained the institutions of the Republic, but he held the ultimate authority. He controlled the most important provinces, commanded the entirety of the Roman army, and held the power of a tribune. By cloaking his absolute power in the familiar structures of the Republic, Augustus managed to do what Caesar could not. He ended the Republic and founded an empire without ever formally proclaiming it, ushering in an unprecedented era of stability. With Augustus in control, the civil wars ceased, marking the start of the Pax Romana. For 70 million people, it was an age of peace. Trade flourished, the rule of law was established. The Mediterranean became Mare Nostrum. This fostered economic prosperity and cultural achievement. Goods, ideas, and people moved freely across the empire. A stable currency made commerce easier. Roman law provided a framework for business. Cities became vibrant centers. The arts flourished. The Pax Romana was built on a professional army and governance. Augustus established a civil service to manage territories. Officials were accountable to the emperor, reducing corruption. This funded armies and building programs. This allowed the empire to thrive. This era was defined by emperors, some wise, others cruel. Under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest extent. It was a multi-ethnic empire, united by law and loyalty. The Pax Romana fueled an explosion of construction and engineering that transformed the empire, showcasing Roman power. The Romans were master builders, their creations functional and awe-inspiring. The vast network of Roman roads radiated from the capital, connecting provinces. Aqueducts supplied cities with fresh water, testaments to Roman mastery of hydraulics. Emperors sponsored massive public works like the Colosseum. Roman architectural innovation was driven by concrete, a cheaper, more durable material. The Pantheon, with its unreinforced concrete dome, remains breathtaking. Infrastructure symbolized the benefits and power of Roman rule, the very skeleton of the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana could not last. The crisis of the 3rd century was a time of near total collapse, characterized by civil war, foreign invasion, and economic meltdown. Emperors were proclaimed by their legions, leading to constant civil war. Economically, the empire was spiraling into ruin. They debased the currency, leading to hyperinflation. The crisis became so severe that the empire itself began to splinter. The Roman Empire was fractured into 3 warring pieces. Rome was brought to the very brink of complete disintegration. Diocletian emerged from the 3rd century crisis, becoming emperor in 284. Recognizing the empire's size, he instituted a radical reform, the Tetrarchy, or Rule of 4, dividing the empire into eastern and western halves. This system aimed to ensure an emperor was always near troubled frontiers and to solve the succession crisis. For a time, the Tetrarchy worked, stabilizing borders and bringing order. However, the Tetrarchy ultimately failed to solve the succession problem, leading to civil wars and the rise of Constantine the Great. Constantine reunified the empire but made the East-West division permanent, establishing Constantinople and shifting the empire's center eastward. As internal struggles consumed the empire, pressure intensified along its frontiers. For centuries, Rome faced Germanic tribes beyond its borders, collectively called barbarians. But civil wars weakened defenses, and tribes became larger and more organized. The arrival of the Huns triggered massive migrations, with Goths seeking refuge in Roman territory. Mistreatment led to a Gothic rebellion, culminating in the disastrous Battle of Adrianople in 378, where Emperor Valens was killed. This exposed the Western Empire's weakness and shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. The empire relied on unreliable barbarian mercenaries, giving power to barbarian generals. The barbarians were now inside, accelerating the Western Roman Empire's final unraveling. The final decades of the Western Roman Empire were a painful story of decline. In 410, the city of Rome was breached and sacked. The Visigoths plundered it for 3 days. The sack sent shockwaves, a clear sign that the old order was collapsing. The Western Empire was living on borrowed time. The provinces were lost one by one. Germanic tribes carved out their own independent kingdoms on what was once Roman soil. The empire was shrinking, its resources dwindling, and its spirit broken. The final blow came in 476, the end of the Western Roman Empire. It was the culmination of a long and complex process, caused by internal decay and external pressure. In the East, the Roman Empire would survive for another 1,000 years, and in the West, the legacy of the fallen empire would shape the new world. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 created a power vacuum in Europe, ushering in a period often referred to as the Dark Ages. The unifying force of Roman law and administration was gone, replaced by a patchwork of competing barbarian kingdoms. The vast trade networks broke down, cities shrank, and the grand infrastructure of roads and aqueducts fell into disrepair. Yet, the fall of the empire was not an end, but a transformation. The legacy of Rome endured, its immense influence echoing down through the centuries to form the very bedrock of modern Western civilization. Its ghost lived on, shaping the future in countless profound ways that are still visible all around us today. One of Rome's most enduring gifts is its law. The principles codified in texts like the Justinian Code, concepts of justice, property rights, and contracts, were preserved by the Byzantine Empire and the Catholic Church. These legal ideas were later rediscovered and became the foundation for the civil law systems used by most countries in continental Europe and beyond. Similarly, the languages of Rome, particularly Latin, did not die. Vulgar Latin, the common speech of soldiers and citizens, evolved over centuries into the modern Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Even English, a Germanic language, is filled with thousands of words derived from Latin, a testament to Rome's lasting linguistic footprint. Roman engineering and architecture also left an indelible mark on the world. The techniques used to build the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and the aqueducts inspired generations of builders. During the Renaissance, architects studied the ancient ruins to rediscover their secrets, leading to a revival of classical styles that influenced the design of countless government buildings, churches, and monuments, from St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City to the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The Roman arch dome and use of concrete set a precedent for monumental construction that defined Western architecture for millennia, a visible link connecting our modern cities to the ancient capital on the Tiber. Perhaps Rome's greatest legacy was the idea of a universal state and the spread of Christianity. After being persecuted for centuries, Christianity was adopted as the state religion in the late 4th century. The administrative structure of the Roman Catholic Church, with its dioceses and hierarchy, was modeled directly on the Roman imperial government. The Church became the primary preserver of classical learning and Roman culture after the empire's fall. The dream of a unified, peaceful, and orderly Europe, a concept born with the Pax Romana, would inspire leaders from Charlemagne to Napoleon. The Roman Empire may have fallen, but its legacy is immortal, woven into the fabric of our laws, languages, buildings, and beliefs.